Faith and social innovation. So what does that mean to you all? I mean, what do you think? What comes to your mind when you hear those words? Well, I want to talk about hopeful economics and what I see. Hopeful economics should be a level playing field for everybody involved. Everybody should get a fair slice of the pie. And we know that's not true. We know that there are people who are struggling just to have a meal, and there are others who are going up in space, and that field is not even. So for me, I want to see a world that's just for everybody, that we all get the opportunity to have a pie, the pie in the sky, that we don't have to worry about where our next meal comes from. And how do we do that? What's the impact? What's our role in that?
I love that thought, Melina. I like your slice in the pie sort of analogy, and trying to give some thought to where is wealth and how is it distributed. I think one of the things that when I think about faith and social innovation, one of the interesting pieces that we've had come at us as a social enterprise franchise, our enterprise sells gourmet soup. So we have profit coming in. And one of the things that I think has been really interesting as we've embarked on this sort of venture in partnership with churches is that people seem to get the piece of the pie, or the piece of the the analogy that we're trying to help people in our community. We're trying to lift up people in our community who have traditionally been on the margins. What they don't seem to really understand is how the profit piece fits into that. And as soon as we get started talking about profit, and that there's profit, and when by profit, I mean, we're rolling back the proceeds of the sales of soup into the program. But as soon as we start talking about income, I probably should talk about it as income instead of profit. As soon as we start talking about income coming into a church, that's a really out there concept for people. It's sort of blowing their minds of like, are we still doing God's work when we're talking about income? Because we're okay with donations, we're okay with grants, but as soon as we get started talking about income, that's a whole different thing. And we've had a lot of questions around, is what you're doing really a faith-based venture when you have income coming in? So I'd love to talk more about that too, but I'm curious to hear your opinions.
Rebecca, that's so pertinent, because one of the things, so running a social enterprise incubator in the global South and South Asia, where we tried and successfully infused faith and comparative theology into the content and programming around training these social entrepreneurs. One of the questions very often used to be, how can we make a profit? How can we make income? We're doing this for people. We're doing this, at the core of this is a deep spirituality. It feels wrong to earn profit or earn an income out of this or make a living out of this. And so a couple of things used to come up very often. One of the most frequent analogies used to be, well, if you're in an airplane and a mask drops down in front of you, you have to wear the mask yourself before you try and put the mask on for the passenger next to you. So unless you yourself are in a place where you are sustained, where you are sufficiently cared for and you have your needs met, how can you go about sufficiently meeting the needs of others? So that used to be one of the key sort of conversations we used to have with these entrepreneurs. The second thing we used to talk about was, we're not saying you're going to make a lot of money. And even if you do make a lot of money, we're not saying you're going to keep it to yourself and go buy a Merc tomorrow. You're going to reinvest that money into scaling some of this phenomenal impact that you're going to create in the world. And then the third thing we used to talk about was, well, under what circumstances could you even make a ton of money, right? Would it be when you become really big and really huge and you scale up a lot? And so one of the things we used to talk about is horizontal scaling instead of vertical scaling. So how can we spread the model by partnering with others instead of making it all about ourselves and all about growing one company and becoming the next Walmart? So these conversations used to give a little more sort of faith and hope and satisfaction to the entrepreneurs who otherwise would feel very, very uncomfortable talking about profit and sustainable models.
Yeah, I'd like to just follow that up by saying, for the group that's going to be chatting with us next, or coming in and having a bit of a chat after this conversation, I'd love to challenge them to really dig into that. Why do we feel so uncomfortable in the church when we talk about income, even if it's not profit, just income? Why does it always have to be funded through grants and donations? Really, when we talk about the sales of soup, we talk about it as a win-win, right? You're purchasing a product and you're creating employment for individuals living in the margins on our community, individuals with disabilities and mental illness. So why do we have to feel that that can't be the same as just donating, just giving the money into the plate? Instead, you're purchasing that bag of soup, you're still handing over the money, but there's this piece of income. And so maybe it's just needing greater clarity around, what is that income going to? Because I think as soon as you start talking about income, people just naturally assume that it is profit, that somebody is getting rich off whatever money's coming in. So I really would love to challenge that assumption that, as soon as there's income, there's profit. Not necessarily, first of all, right? When you take into account all the costs. And so maybe it's just that, challenging people to have a lot more clarity around, well, where is this income going and how is it funding things and what is it doing? Not looking at just that financial bottom line, but really looking at the sustainability piece, the profit, the people. Where is that going?
And just to even make it even more complex, if I'm getting rich, someone is getting poor. And what if it's the poor getting poorer? So one of our entrepreneurs, they set up food banks in communities, and they used to feel so uncomfortable charging people for food. And this was excess food that they would be taking from restaurants and working with nutritionists to make sure that, it's clean and it's edible and all those things and nutritious. And they'd be like, how can we charge people for this? And one of the things that really struck during that conversation was one of our partners, Acumen Fund, they have this manifesto where they say, can you stand with the poor? And one of the big pieces was dignity, right? So when you allow folks to pay, even if it's a few cents a meal, you allow them to have their dignity. You're not giving them a handout. You're not doing charity. You are allowing someone to actually ensure that they have pride, that they have dignity when they come and pay those few cents for that meal. Something to think about, but I'm gonna let Melina also jump in.
Well, I would go back to what Rebecca, the whole thing you said about the income into the church. And I think it's a mind shift. And we have to think about, it's not our money. It's God's money. It's God's economy. And our role is to help. And when it's helping, it's like, I like what you said, Mary, it's not so much giving people dignity. It's not easy for a person to show up at the church to get free food. It's not easy to come to the, whatever the pantry is, clothes pantry, food pantry, and have to rely on that. So what is our role? And, and as a church, I feel like the role for the church to me has always been hope. When I'm down, I go there for hope. We have to shift our mind into abundance. There's an abundance out here. And people still have that scarcity. If I give, I'm not going to have. And that's such the opposite. If you give, you receive so much more. And it may not be monetary. It may be just the blessings that I helped someone. I gave someone that opportunity that they needed. I think when I think about people, nobody wants to be homeless. Nobody wants to not be able to feed their children. So when I think about, again, the role of the church is to provide that hope. I think that when I think about social innovation and entrepreneurs who are trying to impact their communities, they see the need. So they're trying to fulfill the need. So I think it's time for the churches to step into that same playing field and say, what are we supposed to be doing? How are we going to help our community to move to the next level? As churches, you also have to ask yourself, why am I here? I've gone and done conferences and talks, and you say, I've been here for 100 years. Well, 100 years ago, why were you here? Is that still the same reason you're here? What's your impact to your community? What is your role to your community? And I believe some churches have lost their way. They don't want to look inward to say, what am I supposed to be doing here? Have you talked to the people in your community to say, what do you need? How do we fulfill that void for you? So that's what I think when I think of the social entrepreneurs and innovation, is trying to change the landscape of their own communities and help people get to where they are and where they need to be.
Love that thought. I think feeling hopeful, this piece of feeling hope through the body of the church and faith organizations is something that we can really celebrate. And maybe we don't enough. You know, sometimes I think we sort of tend to bash down on different ideas or new ideas, or we get caught up in conversations that are more negative than positive. So I love that you've brought in sort of the positive, like the church and the faith community has so much to offer in this way. And our models in the past have really shown that there's just so much out there. But I really want to pick up on that piece about sort of the sustainability and dignity and doing more, because again, I think the traditional model has been this sort of the handouts. I think people get caught up a little bit in not knowing what to do, right? There's great needs. And so there, sometimes it's just a bit of a, whether or not it's the pastor or the church board or the church members themselves get stuck in that, like, it's so big, I'm not sure. How do we ensure that the people we're giving to are the right people? How do we prevent people from accessing the same services? There's all those conversations. But some of that can result in just, you know, the traditional food bank model, which, you know, let's all get together and give a few cans of food, which again is great. Like I love the initiative of that. I love the, you know, the fact that we have places for people to go when they're really in need is so great. But I would love to, you know, let's push to the next level, because I think you're right. This piece of hope is sometimes what's missing, because giving people a handout is necessary and so needed, but giving them hope is more than just a handout. And so how can we bring the church along to that? How can we bring them along to, like, what's the next step? Because we have those government subsidies for a reason. We have the, you know, in Ontario, the Ontario Disability Support Program, providing that safety net under people. And we're so fortunate that we have that. So, you know, we've got our benevolent funds and different pieces that we're giving that baseline. But what is it that's providing hope? Because the people that I'm talking to in our community that are living on the margins are lonely and bored and not full of hope. They're going to their food bank and they're getting their food and they're going home at the end of the day and they're not feeling full of hope. They are feeling lonely and bored, and you know, that they don't have that piece of dignity. So I love, Miriam, that you've brought in that, like, even paying a few cents for something brings an aspect of dignity that's totally different. So again, like bringing the example of our social enterprise. Well, you know, would we love our staff to be working full time? Yes, we're not at that point yet where our staff are working full time. So lots of people might point out, well, your staff are only working, you know, part time. It's only a few hours a week. Is that really enough? But if you really get chatting with the staff, having something is so much better than having nothing. Sitting home all day and having nothing to do and having no way to earn an income is not enticing them to anything. Like having, and I'm not saying that we're certainly not the answer to the equation, and we need a lot more pieces of the puzzle coming in to really, you know, fill out that continuum of need, right? From sort of the baseline all the way through to sort of full-time employment or of a job, but having something that is bringing that dignity where you really feel like you have brought value to something. You are valuable because you're participating in the economy, you're participating with other people. Those things are so worthwhile. I can't like underestimate those pieces.
Exactly, Rebecca. And the piece that really, so with this social enterprise that we've been talking about, RIZQ, that's their name, RIZQ. One of the things that they really started looking at in terms of this work was, we are essentially vessels. We are here doing this work for God and through God. And so we're not really helping anyone. We are essentially helping ourselves by doing this work. And so the spirit that they work with them completely changed. And similarly, so what happened was, so talking about jobs and creating jobs, they initially started off with a completely volunteer-driven movement. And over time, what happened was these food banks became community centers. So each food bank came with an extra room. And that extra room was used for vocational training, was used for computer skills building, was used for after school services, was used for monthly free healthcare checkups, and a number of other things. And different social enterprises started partnering with these food banks. And eventually, entire communities were being lifted out of poverty and given access to a place that, you know, they could come and be together, you know, that piece around loneliness, a place where they could, you know, someone would take care of their health, someone would take care of helping find them jobs, someone would take care of helping their kids get after school services and education and further training. And eventually, the money that they were making through this helped them scale that model across the country of Pakistan, so much so that they became one of the primary partners during the COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdowns. And they were essentially ensuring food security across the nation in partnership with the government. And so really thinking about, you know, how do we shift from this whole idea of, oh, this is me making profit or income, to, oh, this is me following my vocation and listening to my calling and being the vessel that does God's work. And in that process, starting a movement that is so much bigger than themselves.
I think about what you said, Miriam, about the impact of the venture. And I think about how what we do in Odessa Fellowship and the impact that we try to have throughout the United States with the ventures that we help launch. And their impact is huge. You know, when I think about the people that they serve, we don't directly serve them, but we've given the entrepreneur the skills they need to directly serve their communities and create jobs for others. And that's what should be going on throughout the country. We have a responsibility to change what we see. And so I'm going to give my final thoughts and ask you all to give yours as well. So my question to you all is, as you think about who's going to see this and we're addressing this audience, what do we see? What's the hope we have for them? What do we want them to do? So for me, I want them to stop and think about, what skills do you have? What impact can you have on your community? Who are the people that you're serving? And as a church, take the time to talk to the people in your community. That's my hope. Ask them what they want, what they need. Don't just open up when there's Bible study or Sunday service, but open up your doors to your community and invite them in. That's dignity as well, that you see me. I see you all in my community, and I want to try to change what the problem is. That's my hope. Rebecca?
Yeah, Melina, you've captured it head on. Seeing the dignity and seeing the person for who they are is the challenge to the congregations. You know, they're not a person in poverty. They're not a person who wants to live in poverty. They're a person who wants more. They want more in life, and lots of times they can do more, but the economic system that we've structured around them has prevented them from doing more. And so, what are those systems that we can break down? You know, what are those pieces that we can tackle? The little pieces, right? It doesn't have to be the huge pieces, just the next step. What is the next step of that? So that we can see those people, so that we can give them the dignity that they desire.
I'd add with also thinking about poverty in different ways. How are you poor? What are you missing in your life? And so how do we unhinge this idea of, oh, they are poor, and these labels of, oh, we must help them, to really thinking about, how do we help ourselves when we do this work? How do we become who we are meant to be when we do this work? How do we do God's work when we do this work? And in that process, how do we get our collective dignity back as communities?
So I have a challenge for all those who are watching this great conversation that I've had with Rebecca and Miriam. What does hopeful economics mean to you? What do you want to see the change be? And how are you going to be a part of that? To the faithful community, to the church members, what will your impact be on your community in the world?